Some children walk into a new school and disappear into the background. You know, the quiet type, keeping their head down, just trying to blend in. Yes, that was Paul. But Paul's story didn't start at Preparatory, the elite boarding school where everything would eventually come crashing down. His story started at home, and not the kind of home where you feel safe. His life had been a long lesson in violence. Picture this. You're sitting at the dinner table, you drop a fork, something so small, so ordinary, and the next thing you know, the room goes dark, the door slams shut, and your stepfather is on you, beating you. Not correcting, not disciplining, beating. And the worst part, your mother knows. She knows it happens, but convinces herself that it might teach you obedience. After each so-called lesson, Paul was forced into making peace, shaking hands with the man who had just brutalized him. Pretend it's fine. Pretend we're a family. That twisted cycle repeated so often that violence became the only language Paul knew. And when kids grow up learning violence, they don't always contain it. They carry it out into the world. At school, Paul became the monster others feared. He beat his classmates until they couldn't stand. He even went too far on a friend once, leaving him bloodied, while the rest of the students stood frozen, too scared to step in. His reputation grew. Paul was dangerous. He was hot-tempered and aggressive, and eventually, the principal had had enough. With no sympathy left, he expelled Eric on the spot. Most kids would panic with no diploma, no future. But Paul, he shrugged it off. When your whole life has been about survival, not plans, school becomes just another battleground. Still, his mother wasn't ready to give up. She sold off some of the family's artwork to set aside money for his education and introduced him to an old friend, a lawyer named Johnson. Johnson gave Paul his card, told him to call if he ever needed help. Paul didn't understand why, but he pocketed the card. Then came the bombshell. His mother had already enrolled him in a new school, a strict boarding school. His last chance. Paul promised her he'd behave. He swore he'd finish. But promises are easy to make when you're desperate to please someone who's already disappointed in you. Keeping them? That's another story. Preparatory looked nothing like the schools Eric had known. Boys in pressed uniforms, rules stacked on top of more rules, and a suffocating sense of tradition that dictated everything. His new roommate, Pierre, was his opposite in almost every way. Studious, well-mannered, soft-spoken. But there was something disarming about Pierre's kindness. Against all odds, they clicked. And for once, Eric felt like he might have someone in his corner. But Preparatory wasn't a place where friendship protected you. It was a place where hierarchy reigned. At dinner, another student, Johann, leaned across the table and explained how things worked. Your treatment here depended entirely on your background. Were you from money, power, influence? Then you walked untouchable. If you weren't, you were prey. And right then, Paul saw exactly what he meant. Two boys at the far end of the hall, Otto and Alain, singled out a kid from an ordinary family, mocking him, humiliating him. Everyone else pretended not to see. Otto and Alain weren't just bullies. They were aristocrats, sons of noble families. Their parents' power dripped down into the school itself. They ran the student council, they handed out punishments, and no teacher dared to cross them. With that much protection, cruelty was effortless. And then they noticed Paul. When they tried to rope him into one of their initiations, Paul refused outright. He wasn't about to play their game. But Starburg was a place where defiance came with a price. Because he stood his ground, Johann, the boy who had warned him, paid instead. Otto struck him so hard that he had to be carried away for treatment. That was their message. Disobey us, and we'll make someone else suffer for it. Paul wasn't innocent. He had been a bully himself once. He knew what it felt like to lash out, to let anger get the better of him, to hit someone just because he didn't know what else to do with the storm inside. But what he was seeing now was nothing like that. This wasn't the messy outburst of a kid losing his temper. This was cold, deliberate, and cruel. It was calculated dominance, the kind that takes pleasure in breaking someone down piece by piece. And that difference cut deep. Watching it unfold made Paul's blood boil, because he understood that this wasn't about a fight. It was about control, and he hated it. The next round came quickly. Otto and Alain summoned Paul to their headquarters and told him to clean the piles of filthy shoes. Again, he refused. He walked out without a word. Pierre's face went pale when Paul told him. He begged him not to keep provoking them. Everyone knew that defying Otto and Alain always led to punishment. But Paul? He'd lived through worse than detention. He wasn't scared. Things escalated when Alain accidentally bumped into him in the hallway. He demanded an apology. Paul refused. It wasn't his fault. So Alain challenged him to a fight that night. For a while, Paul was ready. He had fists, he had rage, and he wasn't afraid of blood. But then his mother's voice came back, sharp and clear. "This is your last chance." And at the last minute, he didn't show. Otto used the absence to humiliate him. He told the whole school that Paul was a coward. Then he flexed his power as student council president and handed Eric a punishment: a month of detention, digging trenches around the school. It was during those lonely nights, shoveling dirt until his body ached, that he met Maria, a cafeteria worker. She noticed him sitting alone and started talking to him. She told him he reminded her of her brother. Stubborn, unwilling to bow to authority. Her warmth softened something in him, and even though relationships between staff and students were strictly forbidden, Paul and Maria fell into something dangerous, something real. Christmas brought him back home. His mother greeted him with warmth, but his stepfather? He waited with his whip. When Paul explained he'd been punished for refusing to obey Otto, his stepfather scoffed. "A noble son should be respected," he said, before beating him again. His mother, like always, turned away. Back at Preparatory, Paul wasted no time finding Maria again. They clung to each other under the moonlight, pretending for a few stolen moments that rules didn't matter. But Otto and Alain weren't finished. This time, they poured dirty water over Eric while he slept. He cleaned up quietly. Then, later that night, he marched into Otto's room and dumped the filth back on him. The next morning, Paul turned it into a theater. He sniffed the air loudly in the dining hall, walked in circles, then stopped right in front of Otto. "Stink," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. Laughter exploded. Otto's face turned red, and in a blind rage, he attacked Paul, punch after punch. And still, Paul didn't hit back. He'd promised his mother. Otto didn't care that Eric refused to fight. To him, humiliation was unforgivable, so he turned his sights on Pierre. He challenged him to a fight, determined to draw Eric in by breaking the one friend he had. That night, Pierre showed up, alone. He barely lasted seconds before Otto knocked him flat. Paul arrived too late, carrying his beaten friend back to their room, furious at himself for letting it happen. The next morning, Pierre was gone. His bed was empty, his belongings taken. All he left behind was a letter, an apology, and a plea. In it, he told Paul he was a true friend, and he begged him not to give up. That was the breaking point. Paul walked straight into the dining hall, slammed down his challenge, and called Otto and Alain out. This time, there was no holding back. When the fight came, it wasn't close. Otto's strongest lackeys, bigger, stronger on paper, fell to the ground like dominoes. Paul had been shaped by real violence, by survival itself. He was a fighter in every sense. And when Otto saw his men broken, fear crept into his eyes. But the victory came at a price. Otto discovered Paul's relationship with Maria after raiding his belongings. He took her letter and handed it to the principal. That was all it took. Paul was expelled. Only this time, Paul didn't walk away quietly. He remembered the card. Johnson, the lawyer. He called him. Together, they marched into the principal's office. And Johnson, calm and sharp, threatened to expose everything. The bullying, the discrimination, the teacher's silence. The principal cracked under the pressure. He reinstated Paul, disbanded the student council, and stripped Otto of his power. For the first time, Preparatory felt like a school instead of a battlefield. Paul finished his term, and when graduation came, his mother was there, tears in her eyes. She was proud. His stepfather, of course, was not. He raised the whip again, ready to repeat the cycle. But Paul stopped him cold. He told him this would be the last time violence ruled their home, and then he forced him out for good. Eric had broken free. Back in Preparatory School, the bullies thought they had him figured out. To them, he was just another easy target, someone they could pick on to make themselves feel bigger. But what they didn't realize was that every shove, every insult, and every attempt to break him was only fueling something stronger inside of him. Instead of crushing his spirit, they uncovered the fighter that had been there all along. It was in those moments of being pushed down that he learned how to stand taller, and it became clear that he wasn't the weak one in the story. They were. Later, he reunited with Pierre, who was preparing for studies in Canada. They embraced, promising to meet again. This time, not as boys carrying scars, but as men who had survived and grown stronger because of them. Paul's story goes far beyond just fighting. It's not only about the bruises, the punches, or the battles he's faced. It's about the years of carrying the weight of being pushed around and underestimated. For most of his life, people tried to break him, but at some point, he reached that moment where he refused to bow his head anymore. That's when his real journey began. What makes his story powerful isn't just the fact that he can throw a punch. It's the understanding that true strength isn't always physical. Sometimes it's about restraint, about choosing not to fight, and proving that control and self-respect can be even stronger than raw force.